Hello and welcome back to the Kolgos Operation, a 1940s tabletop war game campaign set in a fictional South America. The invading Kolgosi forces have pushed all the way from the border past Lake Valencia to this point here, a critical defensive juncture, which the defending Abruzans, specifically Alamo force, are going to attempt to hold. If they manage to hold this, then they maintain a final lodgment here and can permanently threaten the fate of the Kolgosi invasion. If they are driven off of the ridges at this mountainous choke point on this corner of the lake, then the Kolgosi conquest is complete. They seize this critical juncture where the road comes around the mountain here, and from this position they can defend their stolen land, and the Abruzan defeat is complete. This battle, the Battle of Lake Valencia North, will decide the fate of the campaign. Now, I have played this battle out using the Fistful of Toes 3 Wargame tabletop rules, and I'd like to run through that with you today. So, first, we're going to do a little battle narrative. Now, don't mind the dispositions of the troops as they're shown here. This is a screenshot, if you will, from later in the battle. Just to reacquaint you with the geography, there's a main road that runs through here. One sec, let me grab a more discreet pointer. This main road runs through here across open ground and then runs along the bottom of this ridge inside the coast, south. And the Abruzans have taken this point here where the flat ground narrows from 300 to 100 meters wide, and they have fortified it with, from the top, dragon's teeth, anti-tank mines, barbed wire, dragon's teeth, bunkers for infantry, more anti-tank mines, and then more barbed wire. A brutal gauntlet for the Kolgosi forces to throw themselves against. Now, the first thing that happened when the Kolgosi set off from their starting places was, I've kind of got visual aids today that'll help tell the story. The M8 Greyhounds, yes, I know these are British armored cars I have on the table, but we'll have to make do. The M8 Greyhounds stormed forward along the road. In Fistful of Toes, wheeled vehicles get an insane movement bonus, allowing them to cross all of that open ground almost immediately. And they were immediately taken under fire by the P-26 heavy tanks dug into the ridgeline here. Those tanks also destroyed a good number of the recon forces. Now, as the Kolgosi advanced across open ground, there were infantry scattered all up and down here. The Abruzans called in artillery and airstrikes, both of which to brutal effect. There was an entire company of M26 Pershing heavy tanks, represented by these more modern Abrams here, that were singled out for attention by the aircraft, and some of those swiftly blasted into smithereens. A bomb airstrike in Fistful of Toes is absolutely nothing to mess with. Brutal losses there, but as the Kolgosi continued to advance, Abruzan tankettes streamed out of the tree line. The first batch were quickly dispatched by a Kolgosi airstrike as competing aircraft orbited over the battle area, strafing and bombing almost at will. Abruzan bombs also rained down, destroying the only bulldozer that the Kolgosi brought that would help them breach those engineering obstacles at the mouth of the valley there. The strafing and artillery were, of course, the huge killers in the opening phases, but things eventually closed into closer combat. I'm going to move the vehicles out of the way. The M8s were obliterated by airstrikes and gunfire from the P-26s on the ridge. The M26s were weakened, but did still hang around. Now, as we see dispositions here, Once a toehold was gained and the Abruzzian forces were driven out of this north town, the Kolgosi began trucking infantry in and dumping them off right here at the road junction. And they kind of scattered in every which way. You can see here that at this point in the battle, only one of the four bunkers here has been emptied of enemy infantry, and already there's another company coming up to fill in those spots. The Kolgosi infantry are scattered across this open ground. That was a choice I made in order to minimize their exposure to artillery and airstrikes. But, as you can probably see, very few of them are within effective range of the enemy infantry over here. And that was a compromise I had to make. So, as the battle continued on and things pressed to closer and closer combat, I'm going to reveal what we're going to call the final state of the battle. As you can see, things got quite messy. Lots of erasures and removals. What we have here, at the very end, we still have a couple M26 tanks hanging out. We have the barest remains of 1, 2, 3 infantry companies in the gap here. The enemy infantry have been driven out completely, and man, that took some doing. It was not until, what is this? I think 11 turns in that the infantry that originally held this position from the start of the battle were finally driven off. We have Kolgosi troops advancing through the forest up the ridge under the cover of a smoke barrage here. Smoke is extremely helpful and by far the best use of low caliber mortars that I've found. The remaining Kolgosi the remaining Abruzzian forces are the company of heavy tanks up here on the ridge, which, frankly, are no match for the M26 Pershings that are about to turn their attention to them, and a company of light tankettes occupying this kind of middle position. Now, they're in an unfortunate spot because the obstacles that are preventing them from closing with the enemy infantry were placed there by their own team in a bid to extend the battle and give them some depth. But now they find themselves on the wrong side, unable to contribute. So this is the state where I stop the battle, because what's going to happen on the very next turn is I looked at the Kolgosi reserve sheet, and they're going to be able to pull in another company of M26s over here and another full infantry company. And I believe that is the point at which the Abruzzians would say that's that. They have no infantry left, aside from Cactus Company down here, which you'll recall is mainly militia. So even if they attempt to hold, the militia are going to flee as soon as they catch their first artillery barrage, and the M26s are going to pop these tankettes like grapes. So this is the point where I zoom out and I say, Kolgosi victory. Now, let's talk a little bit more analytically about what that battle narrative means and some interesting rules things that showed up. So, tactically, what did we learn from the Battle of Lake Valencia North? First thing is, in the Fistful of Toes rulebook, under the section on fortifications, it advises you, hey, if you include fortifications, you risk turning a fun movement battle into a set-piece slog. And boy, were they right. Those dug-in infantry were hard to kill. But looking at the elements that made this meat grinder the meat grinder it was, first, there is a large artillery disparity. Let me get out my point sheets, and we'll review this. The Kolgosi forces have a battery of 107 millimeter mortars and 2 batteries of 75 millimeter pack howitzers. Those are both fairly small caliber, fairly small throw weight systems. And you can see there, because there's only 1 battery, the mortars are limited in availability. They have a couple 81 millimeter infantry mortars, but those really do not make up for the loss. Now, the Abrusians have multiple batteries of 105 millimeter howitzers and multiple batteries of 155 millimeter howitzers. And this is a game changer. Not only are they putting more barrages down more consistently, those barrages are also much more effective, both because of the larger caliber and because they're firing at troops advancing in the open. The Kolgosi are at the opposite end of the stick. They're firing fewer barrages, lighter weight, and at troops dug into cover. So the Abrusian fire was murderous. The Kolgosi fire was mostly harassment. Each side had parity in airstrikes. They had 2 aircrafts worth with medium general purpose bombs and machine gun strafes. And those, because the bombs have such a high fire rating, and because the strafing attacks the flank armor of armored vehicles, those were also incredibly deadly. Each time an airplane showed up, it deleted at least a company from the battlefield. And finally, we got to talk about these dugouts. In Fistful of Toes, let me grab a prop real quick. Every time that a unit in terrain takes a hit, you set that die down that hit them somewhere, and then they get a terrain saving throw. This is probably fairly familiar to most of you wargamers. For something like very light, let's say tall grass, you need to roll a 6 or higher in order to negate a hit. For these bunkers, you need to roll a 2 or higher. That means, on average, if you want to score a successful hit on an infantry stand in a bunker, you need to get 6 hits in the same turn. On average, then, they will roll a single 1. And remember, that hit is not a kill. That hit forces the unit to make a quality check, which they can then pass and hang on for another round. This means that dislodging those troops by fire is incredibly, incredibly difficult to do. So, that's the meat grinder setup. The thing that makes it just murderous. And I'll go ahead and I'll pull the casualty card out now. Kolgos put 9 infantry companies in the line, the better part of 3 battalions, and came out with 3 of them. And of those 3, I would say 2 are in fine fighting shape and 1 is marginal. Part of the reason that the meat grinder works so well is this geography here. This funnel forces concentration. Now, the way the battle was set up, the Abrusian tankettes were actually roaming around up here. And surprisingly, they did a pretty good job controlling this kind of dead space here and denying that to the enemy infantry. But also, just the nature of these fortifications. If you need 6 hits in a round to dislodge 1 infantry, you have to get a lot of units within range of that bunker. And because of this geography here, you're squeezing all those units in right here. And if I can find it, I think it was turn 4. A bunch of the Kolgosi units had crowded in to do exactly that, and then the Abruzzians rolled max on all of their artillery for the next round, and it was just a slaughter. They carpeted everything up and down here, and deleted, let's call it half a battalion, just like that. So, a natural funnel, artillery, airstrikes, and all these engineering obstacles made it absolutely brutal. Now, there were a few units that I noted had some interesting performance characteristics. The first one is the L3CCs. If you haven't ever heard of this, I may throw a picture up in the edit. In the real world, it's an Italian vehicle. It's a tankette about the size of, a little bigger than a go-kart, just big enough for 1 or 2 guys to squat in. It's resistant to small arms fire, and it has a machine gun. It's basically just a little tiny mobile machine gun foxhole. And the way that's represented in Fistful of Toes, got some numbers for you. It has armor from the front and from the sides. That 0 means that you need at least something with a penetration score. You can't fire at it with normal infantry weapons. And it's got a range of 800 meters. This anti-infantry penalty means it can't really fire effectively until it's within 400 meters, which is the range at which infantry can engage it. But it's tracked, it moves well over a lot of terrains, and once it gets to that 400 meter mark, it can engage infantry before the infantry can engage it. Because you see the Abruzzian infantry up here are modeled on the Poles, I believe, and they have a light anti-tank weapon that can reach out 400 meters. The Kolgosi infantry have no such benefit. Their light anti-tank weapon, you have to get into close range with, touching. And the way close combat works in Fistful of Toes is that the approached unit gets to fire at the approaching unit first. So when these L3s come storming down the open ground, sure, they're not offensively hugely powerful, but they're resistant enough to infantry and are set up such that what they're going to do is they're going to stop 400 meters away and spray the infantry with machine gun fire. So the infantry get fired on once. And if the infantry want to go take them out with what I assume are, grenades and Molotovs, then the infantry are going to get fired on again as they approach. So, not a great deal for the infantry. However, once the M26s had nothing better to do, well, let's just say a 1949 or 1946 heavy tank against a 1940s tankette is not exactly a fair fight. However, there are heavy tanks on the Abruzzian side, these P-26s on the ridge up here. And I was originally interested in how the P-26 versus M26 showdown was going to happen. And it turned out to actually not be terribly relevant, because these guys up here basically acted as direct fire artillery the entire fight. They were not dueling with the M26s because their effective range is only 800 meters, and the M26s were hanging out outside of that for much of the fight. And they were plenty busy just absolutely pummeling anything coming down the main road into the meat grinder. I believe they didn't even start exchanging shots until the very end. It was much more efficient for the Kolgosi to just carpet them with smoke to deny them targets and use the M26s to clean up the enemy tankettes. There was also a company of M3 Stewards on the Kolgosi side that was part of the original recon effort. I'm checking my notes to see what happened to them. And it was an airstrike. Yep. Airstrikes punch well above their point weight. Dug-in infantry punch well above their point weight. Checking. Yeah, a deliberate infantry trench is 20 points. An infantry unit is 25 points, give or take. I would much rather have all of my infantry in dug-in positions and have half as many than have, spend all my points on infantry, at least for a static fight like this. Which it is generally true that warfare favors the defender in that way. Now, this last one is both an organizational and a unit matchup. The Kolgosi Infantry Organization. I don't have a neat diagram here, but we can run down their stats and talk it that way. The Kolgosi Infantry Company is built around its 3 rifle platoons. In support, it has 1 infantry weapons platoon, which has some nice things like a +1 against enemy infantry. However, other than that, it's kind of equivalent to just another rifle company, especially because it has the same range. Now, these parentheses here mean it only achieves full rate of fire after being static for a round. You subtract 1 if it moves and shoots in the same round. Now, contrast that organization with the Abrusians. The Abrusians, each infantry company has 3 or occasionally 4 rifle platoons and a machine gun platoon, which is a higher rate of fire. It's got the same anti-infantry bonus, but it has a 600-meter range, which means normal rifles, 400 meters, 600 max, 600 meters, 900 max, out to almost a kilometer. And the Abrusians have these heavy machine guns at the company level. The Kolgosi have 1 weapons company per battalion with a couple heavy machine guns. And that disparity was absolutely felt, especially because guess who was sitting here in these fortifications nearly invulnerable? That's right, a heavy machine gun platoon that just mowed down anything that crossed that minefield there. So, telling at multiple levels, the vehicle versus vehicle level, the tankette versus infantry level. Again, I am surprised how well they did, just denying what would be an easy option would be to run trucks down this road, hook off, and dump the infantry into this tree line, because the infantry can advance down this ridge at full speed. That would have been a nice coup option, but there were always tankettes roaming around up here, denying that easy option. So, those are the tactical lessons. Let's get back to the campaign level, though. So, with this last battle, we have come to the end of the campaign. Now, I'm not going to do a full retrospective right now. I'm going to keep that for the next video. But let's talk a little bit about the implications of what just went down for the future of this operation, even though we're not going to play it out. So, Alamo Force is defeated. They're going to be forced back somewhere east of Marseille. So now, and I believe I've mentioned this before, go check out this terrain in Google Earth. It's a fascinating opportunity that we have today to have high-fidelity topological maps of the entire planet. Go check it out. This is open terrain here. Everywhere east of that pinch point, where the ridge meets the lake, is open. That's the last defensible position for a while, and the Kolgosi are going to own that now. You'll also recall that Task Force Terra broke through the defensive line of Montana Force down here at Magdaleno, so they are going to occupy the southern corner of the lake over there. And I think it is going to be extremely feasible for them to hold this side of the lake and keep those troops in supply. Now, the bigger picture, some other things the Kolgosi are going to have to do. They'll have to garrison Valencia. They'll have to send occupying forces to all of these towns here, San Diego, Tocoito. But this mountain road here, they control the other end of. It's off that away. So their only points of vulnerability for their new conquest of the kind of Valencia Valley here are the road to Tocoito, which leads over a large, mostly unsettled plain, long lines of sight, easy to scout, easy to monitor, very hard, especially 1940s, we're entering the age where air power is extremely relevant. It will be very difficult to drive an armored force up this road, especially with the Kolgosi holding this junction. Same story in here at Villa de Cura. That's probably where the next Abruzzian border guard / front line is going to be. It's going to be very easy for the Abruzzians to hold these mountain passes, very hard for the Kolgosi to force them, and vice versa, very hard for the Abruzzians to punch through here and crack into the interior Kolgosi perimeter. And there's a port right here, and it's just, 70 or 80 miles away from the docks to these units. So they're going to be very well supplied, dug in pretty well, and as we set out at the start, the Abruzzians do not have a huge amount of resources and are going to find it very difficult to contest this. Now, long term, difficult to say because we didn't really bother setting up a political picture for either side. And as Clausewitz tells us, war is politics by other means. And the next strategic steps here depend on what the polities decide. For example, that Lake Valencia battle, yes, the Kolgosi won. It was one heck of a bloody nose, though. They took nearly 75%, 80% casualties. Will the Kolgosi people see, a bare 100 square miles of useful land as a fair trade for that many young men? Will the Kolgosi government remain in power after this little special military operation? Those are all questions that would be great to answer if we were more interested in world building or telling a longer story. But for this campaign, we've told our little story of a couple of armored task forces crossing the border, kicking down some doors, driving the enemy back, and ultimately cracking a very tough defense to seize a limited objective, which was the original plan for the Kolgosi. We'd established some rare earth metal mines over here at the very beginning, and that really didn't become too relevant to the campaign. I'm now realizing that I really should have spread out some of the units a lot more, both in time and space. But we can get into that kind of retrospective in the next video. That's going to be all for this episode. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you guys are having fun, both learning about campaigns in this game and just playing the Fistful of Toes rule set on your own, because it's a great little game if you like pushing tanks around the table. So, happy wargaming, and I'll see you next time.